All right. Welcome back to the Abundant Practice podcast and I guess video series right this second. I'm here with Anna Hollander-Bird. You can check her out at talkwithanna.com. That's ANNA. And Anna, you've been doing online EMDR for a while now. And so I'm very excited that you can help all of the EMDR therapists figure out how to move this online. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I wanted to say, I listen to your podcast. I'm a little bit of a super fan.
Yay.
So I listen to you on long drives when I'm feeling a little low and a little unmotivated. It's just been super, super helpful to have the podcast. So thanks so much for all you do.
Thank you. That feels good today.
Yeah.
Yay. All right. Can you give us a little bit of like your background with this?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I'm guessing most of you on the podcast don't know me personally, so let me give you a little bit of general background about me. I'm a LMFT. I'm in the LA area. So my background is I worked in addiction treatment. I worked in community mental health. I also spoke to, I was part of the Active Minds group, which is like an on-campus mental health awareness program for college students. And so I have a variety of experience, but there was a point in my career where I was like, okay, how do I really progress? I'd gotten licensed. That was in 2015, and I just wanted more. So I'd heard good things about EMDR. I went out, did the training, and what I really liked about EMDR was that I think as a therapist, we sometimes feel like we're just sitting there at times, not always, right? So EMDR really gives you something tangible to do, and something tangible that really deepens the work. So it really resonated for me. And so from there, I started working at a trauma treatment center near like a little bit outside LA in a place called the Pacific Palisades that had a really interesting integrative trauma treatment program. And so EMDR was actually the primary modality that they used there. It's an IOP and PHP, but they use EMDR as the primary mode. So someone that goes in there would get EMDR multiple days a week. So I got to work with a lot of people with complex trauma and really kind of learn how to use it with like the hardest type of clients, so to speak. And so from there, I started my private practice and started to use it more and more in an online context, which is how it kind of evolved. And I want to say to anyone listening, I was a little frightened, right? So I think anyone out there with everything happening with the coronavirus and thinking about transitioning, I think your fears are normal and they make sense because I think, we weren't trained in graduate school to, do online therapy, at least not when I went to graduate school. So I think that it makes sense. And I think it is doable. And I have a couple things to tell you about it. So
awesome. Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hop into it. So what are some tips or tricks or considerations?
Sure. So I just wanted to start with like online basics, just in general. Some of the things you want to make sure you're doing is you're asking people their location. You're making sure, especially with like a trauma client, that their emergency contact is on file, that they're in a private area, and who else is at home with them, right? Because if I have a trauma client and, someone that abused them is home in the other room, I am definitely having a different type of session and want to make sure that, we're not going to be setting them up to be re-traumatized, basically. And kind of making sure that they have some little white noise gadgets if needed to make sure that the situation is a little bit more private. The other thing I wanted to kind of mention is, I think what is important is making sure you're setting boundaries with clients, that especially if you have a new client that's seeking EMDR therapy, if they're in the office, it's a little bit easier to gauge what's happening in real time. So I just want to make sure that they know that if I'm checking in with them more, if I'm saying what happened just there, I saw you shifted your body language right there, that they're aware I'm not trying to be nosy. It's just because I want to make sure I'm reading what's happening, especially with EMDR and integrative trauma work. A lot comes up and and a lot of it is kind of silent, because when you're doing sets with EMDR, their eyes are moving or in whatever bilateral you're using. So you want to make sure you're checking in quite often with them. And also, like, I've had people online that suddenly they do like a motion like this and they have a little tiny vape or something like that. So just setting all those boundaries of like no smoking, no drinking, if you're going to fall asleep, like things you wouldn't normally have to outline in person, you definitely want to spell out for the transition to virtual.
Right. That's a really interesting point. I didn't think about that at all. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying these things of like, what are the things that I wouldn't have thought of that you just want to spell out in the beginning?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple other things that I want to talk about is not everyone's appropriate for online EMDR therapy. So I think that there was an EMDR trainer that once said to me, not everyone is an appropriate candidate. And that gave me so much relief. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Because you go to the training and, you feel like, okay, I should be able to use this almost everyone. It's like, yeah, that might be true. But I also think that, especially for the online context, and let's say, you do, one of the first things you usually do with EMDR is the calm place. And one of the bilaterals that I have, the way that I have people, one of the options for bilaterals is, I have them do the butterfly hug and, right to left tapping. And I've done this before with people, and then there's a lot of emotion that comes up. And so, if you're doing these basic things and you see that there's a lot of emotion coming up quickly, okay, to slow it down and to kind of see and pace it a little bit more slowly than you would in person. Because that's actually one of the things that I had noted is slow it down. So in the intake process, you just want to take as much time as you need to assess to see if they're an appropriate candidate for online EMDR therapy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
Just thinking about like the bilateral stimulation and like the different options for that virtually. Yeah.
So here's my little disclaimer before I say anything about this. I know there's like a lot of EMDR purists that might be listening to this, meaning I was trained with the EMDR Institute, which, kind of most of the EMDR studies are about the eye movements using either your fingers, where the client follows your fingers right to left, or the light bar. However, I'm more practiced now towards the attachment-focused EMDR. And the way that I usually use the bilaterals in a virtual context is I have people tap right to left on their knees, and I have them position the screen so that I can see the pacing with which they're doing that.
And are you seeing their face at the same time? Like, is it a zoomed out view or is it just knees?
I usually see some of their face. Sometimes we can't get it all in, depending. Right. But I found that the tapping is easy because it kind of keeps them a little more in their body because they're tapping themselves. And also it just is a little bit less cumbersome, because the other thing I sometimes use is EMDR music, right? So we'll be seeing each other visually, but then they have their earbuds in and they hear the music right to left bilaterally, and that's also pretty effective. And so the things that I think the jury is still out on is there definitely are some apps. One of them being, I've written them down here, EMDR. It's like a $4 download, and a ball goes back and forth on the screen. But I don't usually use that, and I'm not saying that that isn't something that could be very effective. I just want to get together with my colleagues and really test that out further, because the radius isn't that long. So that's something to consider. And also, I just think that for someone seeking trauma therapy out virtually, we want to make this easy, right? So if they have to, put this on their screen, then they need to be on their phone to see me on another screen. It just gets a little bit cumbersome. So my thought is I start with the tapping or the bilateral music, and then if that's not working, we can certainly consider transitioning to something else. But I just like to make it easy and intuitive to start, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. A couple other things that people might be interested in. Well, let me finish my quick tips and tricks.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I wrote was check in often regarding the affect, which I already mentioned, a change in their vocal tone, a change in a body movement. I just keep asking what's happening now more than I would in the office. And then also I use the chat notes. So like at the end, I'll put in what is their homework in the chat section. Like if they were supposed to practice resourcing or whatever they were supposed to do. And then another thing that I recently kind of started to do a little bit more of is like I have a client, for example, and she has just some low level disassociation that occurs. And I think also with people being home a lot now with coronavirus, it's something, you know, that we're going to see a little bit more of. They're just not in their body, so to speak. Right. So I told her, I said, before our next session, I want you to go out and walk outside for 15 minutes, get in your body before you start the session, in order for you to be already in your body. So that's something I think that can be helpful.
That's awesome.
And another thing is, you know, a lot of times after an intense trauma therapy session, I tell people to walk to their car, kind of swinging their arms, being mindful of like the smells, using their 5 senses to get back in their body. We can't do that virtually. So what we can do is I can ask them to do that, and then I can ask them to text me when they did it. Because I think, how do we keep them a little bit more accountable when we can't physically kind of, if needed, sometimes I have walked someone to their car. It's rare, but just to make sure that they're getting grounded after a trauma therapy session. So we can use little extra accountability markers to assist.
Right.
Is that helpful?
So helpful. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trained in EMDR, so there's some questions I'm probably not asking. I've done it as a client. And with tappers, I guess that's what they're called, the little vibrating things. Are those, I have no idea how much those cost. Probably not something you could just send to all your clients.
No, but I think what I've noticed is that the right to left tapping, and it's something in attachment focused EMDR that she uses really often, it has a similar effectiveness. I know that there are buzzies, so there's these things that people can put on their wrist. But again, I think that, again, you don't want to make it too complicated for someone to get started. So I would just start with the easiest ways to get started, the tapping, the bilateral music. And then if there is a problem, you can move to something more in depth, like trying the EMDR app. Or I also have one other app that I've used before, which is EMDR for clinicians. And all it is, this I can show on the screen if you want. All it is it's basically, so the tappers usually come with the audio component, where it buzzes right, left, and basically the app, all it does is it buzzes right, left, and you can tell them at what speed. So that's something that they can download. It's also a $4 download, and you can cue them at what speed they'd like it to be at.
I'm thinking, because as you were talking about that, the internet connection got a little weird. And I thought about how it's probably so smart to have it be a non-tech thing to start with, the tapping with your hands on your knees, simply because like it doesn't interrupt the little dot going across the screen to have like an overloaded system, which I'm guessing many systems are being overloaded right now.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is I have a client who's super motivated, and actually he started to get a little triggered now whenever I hand him the pulsers, because he knows that we're getting into this deeper work, or the TAC audio scan, whatever the official name is. I always just call them the pulsers. But so he's actually really resonated with doing the butterfly hug motion and using that as the primary bilateral stimulation. We just start doing it a little bit quicker because it's kind of more soothing. His association with that is more positive.
Yeah.
So I just think there's a lot of options. You can have people tap like this. You could have people tap on their knees. And sometimes when someone even gets a little dissociated, I will have them just do some chest taps to just get back in their body, or I'll stand up with them and stretch on camera, because we want to make sure that they're staying in their body and not disassociating, right?
Right. Yeah.
Another couple things I wanted to kind of maybe wrap up with is some other resources. So Anna Gomez is doing a podcast tomorrow, and it's actually already full, or a webinar, sorry, about, she's like a go-to EMDR trainer that is free about doing EMDR online, and it's going to be recorded and live and available, I guess, in a couple days.
Awesome.
The other is EMDRIA has come out with a packet about virtual EMDR. I read through it. I didn't feel like there was anything super groundbreaking. I feel like a lot of it is legal ethical issues. That said, I think that it's helpful just to have something tangible to look through. So that's another resource for people. And EMDRIA has a magazine called Go With It. And so I think there's going to be a lot more published. And then I'd encourage anyone out there to, you know, try some of these things with your friends. Everyone is in quarantine right now. Call someone up that you know is EMDR trained, pick an easy target, and you can try, you know, tapping on your knees, or you could try using EMDR on your screen and see which one you like better, so that you kind of have a sense of confidence about which you'd prefer to use with clients.
I love that. And just getting practice before you go to this whole new way of doing the thing that you're trained in and you know to do. But sometimes the tools can trip us up. I mean, I'm sure the first time you used the pulsars, the first time you switched from this to this, which I just did the fingers and then the butterfly tap for the podcast listeners who can't see me, but that was probably, you know, it makes us all a little bit nervous to try something new. And we're all a little bit nervous right now anyway. So yeah.
Exactly. And I think that is something to consider, right? Is I think we can't leave this conversation without talking about just the fact that, you know, if you already have someone with either a single incident trauma, but we know most of us out there are dealing with people with complex trauma, that this whole thing about COVID is going to affect them. And, you know, even for me, one thing I forgot to mention is I actually, little self-disclosure, part of what also got me into doing this is because I did my own trauma therapy online, because there was a trainer that I had met and I really liked her, and she lives far away. So we started doing my own trauma therapy online, and it was just like really interesting. And I saw that it you know, it could be very effective. But I noticed even for myself, I'm like, I don't think I want to jump into some super deep work right now. I just want to kind of cope with what's happening in the here and now. So I think it's just something for all of us to consider with our clients that have experienced trauma.
Yeah. Yes. And are currently experiencing like trauma reactions. Absolutely. Yes. This is so helpful. Thank you. Would you email us those resources so we can pop them in the show notes?
Of course. Of course.
Thank
and
you
it was
so much.
To be here, and yeah, I'm curious to hear, because I think that it would be really neat for people to post like some of their success stories with the online EMDR and what's working, because I think we're all learning together.
Absolutely. And maybe like when we share this in the Abundance Practice Builders group, people can hop in and share their great experiences or their hiccups and get some help around it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thanks
awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And everyone stay safe amongst everything happening. And if you need to find me, Anna Hollanderbird, LMFT, talkwithAnna.com.
Awesome. Thank you.